Welcome to the 7th HYPIA Research meeting. And today, as you can see on the screen, the topic of our presentation will be Raising Children in Multiple Languages, led by Anja. We will have a presentation on the topic for 15 minutes prior to the subsequent discussion. Anja, welcome.
Thank you. Should I start screening
Yes.
my sharing?
I'll stop sharing my screen and now you can share yours.
Okay. Just a sec. So, welcome everybody. I'm really happy to be presenting today this topic. Actually, this topic is very special for me because I'm right now employed, working in the development center in Novo Mesto. I am part of a project Pony, and actually I'm working on my business idea that actually is how to raise or teach children in multiple languages. So this is very personal topic. So I hope there will be enough time in the end that I tell you maybe a little bit about my own research and how I discovered everything and all that I've tried out and all the conclusions I've come to, and the conclusions that I've what I have figured out. So today's topics are 3 articles. Actually, the first 2 are articles, but the third one is a book. So in the first article, I will be presenting how can visiting certain school before you go to the primary school or language school or kindergarten influence the metacognitive awareness of children, and the difference between those children who do visit it or not, and they will also compare those children, either they speak many or just one language. In the second article, I will pay a lot of attention of meaning of code mixing and code switching, and how is this compared in bilingual, trilingual, or multilingual children? I'm sorry. In the last book, actually, we'll be discussing the chapters 6 and 7 from the Chinese author. She was writing about her 2 children who were raised in 3 languages, in Chinese, English, and French. And she was writing about her personal experience. What I really liked about this book was that she gave a lot of references in which you could find more and read more articles about the certain topics. So I decided to choose 6th and 7th chapter because let's say 6th chapter is somehow connected with the first article, while in 7th chapter she sort of writes some kind of conclusion about what has she written in the whole book. So let me start. In the article Language Learning Experience in School Context and Metacognitive Awareness of Multilingual Children, it said that in European Union, by European Council, has been decided that children have to speak many languages, so at least 2 languages from a very early age. So they were then discussing the context that the children acquire in school and naturally at home or their environment. I know you probably know what metacognitive awareness means, but because it's very important to understand this article, I especially wrote it down. So it's individual awareness of his or her learning strategies and mental activities to self-regulate the learning process. Also, what was very important in this article was how expolingual situation of communication, which actually means a person when you are in the state, when you already know a certain or your native language and higher level, you already have finished certain schools, but yet when you start a new language, you are in very low level. So your abilities are very high, you are very educated already, but because you don't have a lot of vocabulary or knowledge of the grammar, you're not able to express yourself well in that language in the level that you mentally can. So this is the expolingual situation of communication. Main objective of this paper was to examine actually the effect of the contexts in which multilingual children acquire several aspects of metacognitive awareness. So mostly often asked questions are either multilingual children are more sensitive to communication needs than monolingual children, but this actually was not the main question of the study. They wanted to know either those children who experience a new language learning in a formal context, so those children who already learned something before in any kind of school are better at awareness as those children who didn't visit any kind of school or school system or kindergarten before they went to the primary school. So from the further research, they already concluded that those children who did who were part of those schools were more inclined to engage in different strategies and different works in different situations that they were put in, and they were aware of the strategies that other peers who were not in the school system weren't. But they haven't found any differences of this kind between children who spoke one or more languages. They also found increased metacognitive awareness in those children who visited school. So how do they perceive the certain situation of communication? How did they understand the situation, and what did they understand from it? They were also doing some research, playing different videos where they don't understand actually the language, and they just discuss their reactions and research how do they react to those to that what they have seen. So the hypothesis of the study is actually that those children who do not visit any kind of school before, they were more aware of the contextual cues. I'm sorry, I did a mistake. Those who do visit school, they would be more aware of the contextual cues that those children who did not won't. And they even said that they might be more inclined to answer to the actor, while those children who did not visit any school, they won't want to participate with the actor. Because of course they are not used of teachers all the time asking questions and making them be part of the discussions. So in this research, there were participating 54 children, 32 girls and 22 boys, and they were all pre-garden or kindergarten children still. In this research, they were more or less around 4 years old. There were some 3 years old and just a few 5 years old, but more or less they were 4 years old. And they were watching 4 different movies, firstly without the sound, and then with the sound of a language that they did not understand. But those were children who understood up to 4 languages. So at the age of 4, they spoke from 1 to 4 languages. So they were watching a movie where the actor participating in the video was cutting the fruit or filling a glass of water. And of course, it was a language that they did not understand. So in conclusion, they did find out that those children outperformed the children who did not visit any kind of school. So they were participating with actors, they were responding to the questions, and they were aware of all kinds of contextual cues. And they even didn't want to give up or didn't give up so frequently as those who have never visited any kind of school system. And they also find out their knowledge was better, and they look for a compromise even between the cues every time they had an opportunity. And also that they dissociate the different notions. So then they noticed when the people were silent, when there was a foreign language input, and they discussed it and answer it in the comments with the person they spoke to. So to go to the further article, in the second article, there is with the title called Mixing and Language Dominance between bilingual, trilingual, and multilingual children, will be discussed how code mixing happens or how often do bilingual, trilingual, or children who speak more languages mix their languages among each other. So here I think it's very important to understand what actually code mixing means. So the terms that will be used in this research are code switching, borrowing, and transfer. So code switching, it's actually a smooth change between the languages when the speaker alternates between two or more languages or a different language varieties in the console in one single conversation or situation. For comparison, transfer is a process when the speaker does use syntax from one language and the material from the second language, but at the same time does that unconsciously, while code switching is some kind of sign of advancement of knowledge in different languages of this person, so he does it consciously. So transfer is something unconsciously, and switching something consciously. I won't repeat all the text because it's written on the PowerPoint already. So very important to expose is also the code mixing, which is actually, I put some examples. I use Spanish because most of you here understand it, or at least you can understand it from the subtitles. So this is why I decided to choose English and Spanish. So from here we can see the examples of code switching, borrowing, and code mixing. As I said, code switching is something when you speak certain language, and then when you finish the sentence, you continue speaking in another language, but it still has the same meaning, it's the same context, it's the same story. Just first sentence is in one language, and then second sentence in another. While borrowing, it's actually when you use the grammatical rules from one language, the one that you speak, but you conjugate the word from another language based on those grammatical rules. But here I have an example of code mixing, which is actually the mixing of two or more languages in or language varieties in speech. But those mixing can be understood as alternation or insertion. So alternation is a smooth change between the languages, mostly involve grammar or vocabulary, but insertion is embedding language material from one into respective other languages. So what was this study about? They were doing a research in how often do children code mix between those languages. And they find out that actually code mixing is rare when they are exposed in situations when they have to speak just certain or one language. So even everyone who speaks one language, of course, behaves monolingually, but also those bilingual, trilingual, or multilingual children or people, they can be put in situation where they don't need other languages, where they just speak or use one language. So when those children are exposed to situations like that, when they didn't have to speak with three different people in three different languages in the same environment, the same place, where they spoke to one person just in one language, then they didn't mix or code mix those languages among each other. So again, what they find out was that there was no correlation actually found between code mixing and language unbalance. So either how good are you at certain language, in what level are you, that didn't influence either you will mix more or not, as when I'm talking about children. And also that neither did code mixing influence the balance of languages, neither did unbalanced languages cause anything so that children would mix the languages more. But they do say that there is possibly a relation between language dominance and code mixing, and it differs depending on the level of complexity of mixing. Let me go to the last topic. So this is actually not an article, this was a book, as I already said, and the title of the 6th chapter was Identity and Personality Development. Here, the author, she speaks about children's identity and personal formation process that were acquiring three languages.
And yeah, you have 1 or 2 minutes left.
Yes, I will conclude very fast. So she exposed the linguistic identity in distinct and how does that influence their personality. She exposes the advantages and disadvantages that her children had, or that she noticed in her children, that might or not have also other children. She was exposing the difference between nature and how everyone acquires language into certain with certain universal language device, and how the environment helps design this as well. She was putting a lot of attention that there should be that doesn't matter how much input you put as a parent. The more important is how not so much quantity, but the quality that you put into the children. She also exposes the differences between the languages that might influence one another, and also the similarities. So because they spoke English and French, and reading pinyin in Chinese was easier, but at the same time speaking, for example, English, after they went to school, this influenced their understanding of certain Chinese tones. So maybe just to conclude, those are 10 advices she gave in the last chapter, which are all of those advantages if you raise children in multiple languages. Then you have to pay attention to what are children comfortable with, because they might not want to speak your heritage language. That you have to take care of yourself, because if you are angry and you don't and you're not present when you play with children or teach them or help them with their homework, they won't put any effort as well. Also, she says that very important is the communication between the languages, and that you learn and teach them not just language, but also the culture and the language itself. Also, don't give up if you don't have time every day, because you can always spend a day without that language, or a whole week not practicing the language. But what is important is to include the language in all activities. And of course, this is something that is a lifelong process. This is all from my side. I just posted for the end my special technique I called Auto-All technique, which actually means one toy, one language. I'm sorry, I wrote it wrong. And it's based on basically on Auto-All technique, but it refers that one person is represented by one toy, which actually helps you, because you don't have to use many people to speak with children one language, but the same person can speak in different languages with the children, just as long as they have a certain toy that represents the language. So if you want to learn more about what have I discovered and so on, we can open the discussion in further, but that will be all from my side. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Anja. This was a very informative presentation. Now I will share my screen and open the floor for anybody else to participate. I'm very interested in what you said about the one toy, one language technique. I'm also concerned about one of the notions that you mentioned as a summary of one of the articles, which is the code switching idea, right? So the thing about code switching is that it presupposes the existence of discrete self-autonomous codes that we call languages, right? And then it explores how we change from one of those languages to another one. But over the last decades, this view has been contested, and rightly so, in my opinion, because the existence of languages, the supposed existence of languages as separate from each other, is a socio-cultural construct. It's not a neurobiological reality. So the alternative paradigm is called translingualism, and I have a video on this in the Hyperpolyglot Activist. And it departs from the assumption that there's no such thing as separate languages. There is just one common unified linguistic repertoire from which people borrow in order to articulate sentences. So it looks from the outside as though you're switching between languages, because that's what people were told in school, that there are different languages that are separate from each other, discrete, autonomous, self-contained, etc. But that is actually something acquired in school. There's been a lot of studies that show that children prior to school do not really have that understanding of languages as being separate, but rather they process different interactions. For instance, interaction with my father in Dutch and interaction with my mother in French is not conceptualized as now Dutch, now French, so as a code switch, but rather interaction with my father and interaction with my mom using what I know, which is not necessarily separate languages, but one unified linguistic repertoire. So I think it's important to challenge that idea of code switching in this discussion. But without further ado, please, I open the floor to anybody else who wants to make comments, suggestions, observations on Anja's presentation. Who wants to participate? So I have various hands here. Victor?
Okay. First of all, it was a very interesting studies, and very good presentation, fantastic. Second, I really like the concept of the auto technique, and I do believe it can be used with adults too, adapted to adults too. Something to think about. I've read the 3 articles. As Carlos said, well, I'm 56. When I was young, it was felt that children should not learn the 2 languages at the same time. It was not considered good to development. I started learning languages at about 10 years age. It was not early. But I have a personal experience with a kid which is now about 23 years old. He was the kid of a friend of mine, a physician who worked at the hospital. The family was multilingual. He was about 4 or 5 years old. The family was multilingual. His father spoke English, his mother spoke French, and they spoke to him in French, English, and Portuguese because they were in Brazil. They had recently migrated to Brazil. Eventually, he went to France, and the young is trilingual and quite functional. We met my daughter met him there. He's quite functional in the 3 languages. By that time, it was about 20 years ago, people said if a kid would learn 2 or 3 languages at the same time at that age, he would not be well. He's a totally normal person. I remember you also that when I finished medicine in 1988, people believed that the brain had fixed areas for fixed areas of knowledge after Penfield's research. Today, we don't believe it's quite that because we have neuroplasticity. Just to mention an example, I've also had a patient, a female patient, who was bilingual. She was Japanese, and she spoke clearly Portuguese. After a stroke, she lost one of the languages. Okay, it's evidence that there is an area of language in the brain, but it's not definitive. There are others. She could be trained eventually, retrain the language. So language is flexible, and I do believe a kid, that person can be taught from a very early age, bilingually, trilingually, at least. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Victor. It's important, yeah, to understand, as Victor said, how things have changed over the last decades. There are myths that continue to pervade our discussions, one of which is that you cannot learn various languages at the same time. The other one is that, yes, as Victor said, we have different modules for different functions of the brain, and both have been debunked consistently, I think, in the literature. Tim wants to say something.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation. This is more a question rather than a comment. The last of the 10 points at the very end was to promote multilingual learning and parenting. And what my question is, what do you think that we, when I say we, society, can do to promote this? I come from science, and there isn't really at the moment in science a group of people to improve the linguistic situation. By that I mean there's nobody really promoting multilingualism in science, which is something that I'd like to change myself. So from the point of view of raising children, what do you think should be done, or what could we do as polyglots to promote this?
Is this a personal question to me or to everyone else?
Well, it's just it's directed to you, but also if anyone else wants to answer, brilliant.
Thank you, Tim. Anja?
Okay, so should I answer? So to be honest, yes, I agree with you. There is not a lot of community in different countries in different topics, so it's hard to expose children to different spheres of in different languages. But what she actually meant with this last point was actually that you should be part of every parent that also are raising children in multiple languages. That if there is no school or no language school in that language, you should start one, or you should find people who are interested and start your own, I don't know, not school, but at least meetings every Sunday, or like they have church meetings in different countries. Why shouldn't they have a language meetings or language conversations? Because I remember when I was in university, just in the capital in Ljubljana, there were a lot of opportunities to have a language courses for free, but in smaller towns around Slovenia, they don't have it. So how can you practice the language and not if you don't want to drive every day back to the capital, right? And people don't have time. So if you don't see any opportunity in your environment, then with this the last sentence she meant, you start one, or you find people to connect with them and make your children part of this. So I hope I answered. If not, ask me again another question. I will be happy to respond.
Thank you, Anja. So self-organized regular meetings could be a possibility to promote multilingualism in local communities. Deborah wants to contribute.
Yes, I just want to say thank you, Anja. That was very interesting, and the readings are also very interesting. I'm going to go back and read them again more thoroughly. I went through quite quickly. Your one toy, one language would have been hugely useful for me when I had my own children very young. I wasn't confident enough to bring them up multilingually. So what I just used to do was get a lot of books in different languages, children's books, and just read them to them as if I was reading an English story. I just read them in German, I read them in Spanish, and they just accepted that. And I had friends that spoke other languages, so they were exposed to other languages, even though they weren't speaking them themselves. And I noticed that they were taking it on board when my son was about 3.5, and he had a little friend who came from a South African family, but he had a speech defect or speech impediment, this little boy, so he spoke a little strangely. And I never commented on it. And then my son turned around one day and said to me, I wonder what language he speaks at home. And I realized that he had assumed, because he spoke differently, that he must be speaking another language at home. So had sort of taken on board the idea of multilingualism, even though he did actually ask someone for a drink of water when he was very little. He said mas when he wanted more to a Chilean woman. So he was picking it up, and has then gone on now and speaks Japanese quite well now as an adult. So I think for parents that don't feel confident to speak more than one language, but actually want to give this multilingual background to their children, there are still ways of doing it, giving them a little bit of an experience of it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Deborah, for this lived experience contribution. Ruben wants to add something to the conversation?
Yes, thank you very much, Anja, also for the presentation. And I think the idea, one toy, one language, I think this is a great idea. Also for the fathers or who has not more friends who maybe are native speakers in different languages. I think this is a great idea. And I wanted to ask you also, if do you have that there is a big difference between multilingual children who take part in the kindergarten, who join the kindergarten, and them with don't join the kindergarten. So I face also that these social interactions between children, I think this is really important for also improvement languages and communication between other children.
Mm-hmm. So the question, Ruben, is whether there is a difference between kindergarten and non-kindergarten children as regards what exactly? The use of the one-toy language technique?
Regarding the communication improvement, communication performance of children, multilingual children.
Okay. Okay. All right. Perfect. Anja, do you want to?
Okay. Answer. Yes, I want to answer all the questions. So first, Deborah, yes. Or maybe I should actually explain the technique. This technique it doesn't exist yet. This was my own invention, my own naming of the techniques. Maybe just to explain what techniques are right now. For raising multiple language children in multiple languages, they don't speak a lot about those techniques, but one technique is opa-ola, which actually means one person, one language, which actually means if you have a partner from different language backgrounds, both of you speak to the child your native language, and maybe you live in the third country, which is neither the country of you, either your partner. So the child may be raised in 3 languages, and then he or she might have a nanny within the 4th language. But you see 4 languages, and that's it. But with and then is another technique. There was called time and place, which was actually I think Richard Simcott raised his daughter this way. It was just speaking about everyday different topics to your child in different languages. While you went to the ice cream, while you went in the park, you were using different languages. So you used everyday situations, and you used this special time, special occasion for these special languages. You see, so what I did was somehow, let's say, unite those techniques, but take something better from each one of them. So I said it, even though if you speak many languages and you don't want to speak just in one language to your child, because I did some experiments already with a 16-year-old boy. For example, I'm Slovenian, so I was practicing this with Slovenian children, and he was 16 months old. He didn't speak any other language or wasn't exposed to any language, at least not intentionally, until that age, until that day. So, but he already understood Slovenian. He was not able to speak yet, and he reacted to all kind of wishes from their parents. So when his father agreed to be part of my research, I actually asked him which language do you want him to teach. Do you want me to teach him? And he said, you know, doesn't matter for which language he shows interest. This language you can teach him. So I actually tried different languages: Slavic, Germanic, Romanic languages. And it's funny, he didn't react to any, at least just Russian, which I later assumed that because it was so similar to Slovenian, it's the Slavic language, he actually paid attention, look at me, but he didn't understand what I want. When I was speaking Spanish, English, Portuguese, I don't know, different languages, he did not understand, he did not respond to me. So we did another research. We then decided that as long as his father already speaks English, so we decided so that he will speak to his child in English for a longer period of time. And now I am collecting data, but he's using this toy that I presented as a toy for English. And he says, you know, if I was speaking Slovenian and then switched to English, he turned around and didn't want to talk with me. But when we were playing and I put this special toy in front of him, then he knew, okay, it will be English. We'll start playing in it. So this toy was somehow representative of English because, as I said, the child was speaking just Slovenian with parents and maybe grandparents till that moment. So this toy meant there will be a certain change of languages, and the same person I can speak with the same person, but in different language.
Anja, 1 minute to answer to Ruben's question, please, on the kindergarten versus non-kindergarten. How does that influence multilingual communication?
So, as I said, I wanted to present you those researches that already exist, what I have done. But as I said, it's a fresh idea. I'm just working 2 months on this, so I don't have further information about how this technique might influence the children further. But I will start working with older children as well very soon, like 4 years old now. And maybe afterwards, after 2 months or something, I can respond to that question that you have. Okay. Well, that will be all.
Thank you, Anja. Matthias wants to make his first contribution.
Thank you, Carlitos. I will be very brief. First, multilingual children since birth or since early childhood can multilingual children since birth or since early childhood can engage in cross-cultural situations as easier as those who have learned multiple language at a later stage. Neuronal plasticity remains more or less the same in the language learning process, despite that most studies say that as the earlier the better. In my opinion, multilingual raised children are more prone to associate alexema, I mean a sign, a meaning, semiotic, alexema. Multilingual raised children are more prone to associate alexema in 2 or more languages at the same time easier. Thus, they have the tendency to code switch with their parents and relatives. Second, children who have learned 1 or more language different than their own in their households, I mean, when we talk about, for example, like children of foreign parents, children of mixed background, are more prone to code switching and or code mixing in formal and informal situations, especially with their parents and relatives. And third and last, the national or regional environments, when we have, for example, official and co-official languages, and the educational models, the educational environments, also contribute to determine which elements of the second or donor language are incorporated into the first or recipient language while code switching. Just that.
All right, thank you, Matthias. And apropos what you just said and Anja said before, the 1-to-1 language experiment, etc. Don't you think that precisely the fact that we have to try so hard to keep languages separate from each other by developing this 1 person, 1 language technique, or the finding a specific time associated with one language with specific place, or a one-to-one language variation. Don't you think that all of these techniques show the artificiality of separating languages, show that languages operate in a unified repertoire de facto, and that's precisely why we need to try and come up with techniques that are effective at separating them, because that separation comes afterwards, after the fact, rather than being there already, as presupposed by the paradigm of code switching. I think that the one-person, one language technique, the time and place, the one-to-one language techniques, all of these testify to the fact that translingualism takes place first, and then we come and sort out those linguistic repertoires into different quote-unquote languages. But I would like to hear other opinions on this. It's a question I ask everybody. So I have Victor, Anja, Usman. Usman hasn't participated yet, so Usman and then Gayan. Usman?
Thank you, Carlito. Speaking to your question about translingualism, I do agree in the abstract with it, and I'll give you a shared experience, lived experience. So oftentimes in the country I live in, Pakistan, you code switch, which is actually language switch, but it's actually code switch, which is that at different levels you will speak in different dialects or different codes, different vocabulary, based on who you are speaking to. And it's more visible in a South Asian context than most other contexts. So for example, I would switch to Punjabi if speaking to a maid or somebody or a driver, but if I'm trying to have a little bit of an elaborate conversation, I won't do it in Punjabi. It just doesn't seem right. And vice versa, if somebody is trying to be too frank with me, they'll be in Punjabi and be like, whoa, I barely know this guy. Why is he, you know? And that sort of barriers. But it doesn't click in our mind actively that I've switched into this language deliberately for this. It actually happens over a gradient, which corroborates the translingualism worldview. And it happens a lot. And what you actually have is a mishmash at the end, where you will throw words that are not Urdu, they're Punjabi, or English mixed with Urdu, or et cetera, et cetera. And there's all sorts of hybrid formats that come. And I think this is a very good case study for the translingual aspect and code switching / language switching / et cetera. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Usman. Yeah, exactly. I mean, based on what you said, there is no difference between what some people have described as switching between languages and activating different parts of our linguistic repertoire on the other hand. And it seems more that we are activating different parts of a linguistic repertoire insofar as this is not conscious effort, right? Which is presupposing the switching paradigm. Okay, and Gayan? Gayan, do you want to add to this conversation?
Yes, I have forgotten to unmute. Sorry. Thank you, Anja, for the very good presentation, because I discovered the book for me, and actually I read almost all the chapters of it. So what interests me very much in your OTOL technique, one toy, one language technique, is that it has in fact a very strong theoretical underpinning. You can just keep in mind the name Yuri Karaulov, that Russian linguist who gave the idea of language personality. Actually, all our code switching is also taking place because of changing the facets of our personalities, the roles. Coming back to children, raising in as multilingual children, I observed also, and I know from my friends, that children usually speak different languages to different people. And to those who speak, for example, the father speaks French and the mother speaks Chinese, so they respond in the relevant languages. And that is one facet of their personality. What is interesting for me in all this story is the link between the language, personality, and because I observed some cases when in emotional states people are forgetting their language choices, I am also interested in the function in emotions as a factor of code switching and code mixing in multilingual children, and not only children. I remember myself starting to speak with one of my friends in Oman. I started speaking with him Armenian, though we both knew Russian and English, and I did not notice that I'm speaking my mother tongue because we were talking about something very important. And I just went on and on and on till they told me, oh, okay, we understood you are speaking about something very important, but you are not speaking the languages we know. So I think that children also in emotional states will go back to the first language, which is very important to find out in multilingual families. Thank you that much, just raising problems for further.
Thank you, Gayan.
Perhaps studying.
Yeah, the idea of language personalities. I remember that Richard Stimcott in recent live questioned that idea of language personalities. He said, no, I don't really think there are different language personalities. But then again, Gayan did not really talk about language personalities, but different aspects of one's personality, right? Which is a more fine-grained approach. But it's an interesting idea to discuss, and also the idea of emotional situations and the influence they have in multilingual people, right? There are a lot of studies, for instance, about swearing. When you feel really strong opinions about something, that you tend to, in theory, revert to your first language, or, there are notions of authenticity tied into this. Who else wants to participate? We'll begin now a second round with Victor.
Okay, good. Meanwhile, I was hearing and making a brainstorm. I would like to remind you of some previous videos and studies of ours. On other meetings, we discussed that some physiology aspects of our brains. We discussed that when you speak one language, mostly the brain inhibits other languages for you to speak efficiently. So you speak like English and your other languages are a bit inhibited. We learned also that in time with learning, I would say the geographic location of languages in brain moves to other areas as it's stored in subcortical areas. We learned also that language learning not only activates brain, but also may bring some alterations in personality. And we learned studied synesthesia as a technique or as a stimulus for learning languages. So in the technique that Anja proposes, I find it very interesting because it may be used to stimulate kids to learn. And also, I think it may stimulate adults to learn too. And also, I was thinking here, it could be worked as some sort of Pavlovian conditioning, because this toy will be associated with French, that toy would be associated in English. Or for adults, for example, I do that in my learning of Baltic. Blue is associated with Ukrainian, red is associated with Belarus, and it makes me easy to channel and inhibit, because I think red and inhibit other languages that are not red. So this is just some ideas. These are just some ideas joining the idea of auto, one toy, one language. We can say one token, one language. One token. The token is this mouse, the color blue, anything, this drink, and it might enhance my learning. Just an idea.
Thank you, Victor. The idea of language inhibition, certainly suggestive, because activating something means deactivating something else, right? So there's always that tension. Yeah, one token, one language is also very interesting. Also within the same language, for instance, when I was learning Mandarin, for different tones, I will write the word with different color fonts. And so words that have a first accent, then with, say, in red, words that have a second accent, then in green, etc. So it can also be used within the same language, not just across languages. Who else? We have Anja.
Okay, I just want to respond to many questions, but before I start responding, after I finish, I want to invite you to tell your own stories, because I know these two of you have raised your own children this way, raised in many languages. I would like to learn, how did you do it? Which techniques did you use? What did you learn from your experience? What would you do differently? So I think at least two of you have this experience. Please share it with us. Okay, so to go answering the questions first, from Gayan, I think, and somehow I think to everyone's question. So why I choose the toys? Because as Usman and Carlos said, different person, we speak with different people, maybe in different languages, with different emotions. It changes you when you speak certain language. So this is what I wanted. So that doesn't matter what the person is, if you like the person, if you don't like the person, you can always love the toy. So it doesn't matter which toy you choose for a certain language, you will always love this toy, you will always love this language, even though you don't like this person, or you had an horrible experience with certain people that speak certain language. So with certain toys, I want to avoid this unwillingness to speak certain language because of bad experiences that you had with this language with certain people. I think this is why I wanted to change it to toys. And I don't know, maybe I asked answers to some questions or haven't. If I didn't, please ask again, and I'll try to respond more into details.
Thank you, Anja. And we have Ruben, then Usman. Ruben?
Yeah, I just want to comment a little bit my story raising my son with his who is trilingual now. He is 5 years old, and he's learning 3 languages as a mother language. And yeah, we starting from the beginning with one person, one language. So so from that point of view, if the parents, they are native speakers from different languages, and we live in a third country, so definitely there are 3 languages which are native. And and another important point is to start early at the preschooler, at the kindergarten. So if I think I noticed also from my son and also friends of him, the children, we start very early, even with 1.5 years to the kindergarten. They are more social. They can improve their communication skills are much better. They perform the communication skills. I think this is really important for children. And I noticed that this difference from children who start early in the kindergarten and those who start later on. And also, I want to also to mention the difference to associate languages with expressions and personalities and emotions. Like when you see, for example, a child speaking in a language, and then change the language, and you see, okay, he's using different expressions. The emotion is different. The tone of the voice change. This is really curious, but it's interesting. And yeah, that was what I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruben. Very important to hear those lived experiences, stories, as Anja said and Ruben instantiated. What about Victor? Oh, sorry, we had Usman and then Victor, right? Usman?
Sorry, my hand wasn't up. That was a mistake. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Then Victor.
Okay, just something, little comments. I don't want people to say I'm telling you, language learners are dogs of Pavlov. It's just the technique. Yeah, the technique is live, and we are not dogs, but we can use it in a constructive way. Yeah, and it occurred to me while we were speaking that the boy I knew was one person, one language, because his mother spoke to him in French, his father spoke to him in Portuguese, and he spoke to everybody else, his father in English and to everybody else in Portuguese. Is living proof that the method works. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor, for that remark. Ruben, would you still like to make a contribution?
Can you just say which languages did you use with your children? Which languages do you speak? I'm sorry, you didn't say before.
Okay, sorry. Yes, my son speaks Croatian with his mother. He learns Spanish with his father, and we live in Germany. So, so automatically he is learning 3 languages, his mother language, and therefore this one person, one language is very useful. And I can also I'll confirm that it works. And then the point when the fathers also speak more languages, like for example Italian or Valencian language, and this, I think they take also some of them, they get some information, but from that point of view, I haven't tried to also to press so much, like this is like he's having fun with that. And maybe if he's interested in the coming years and want to learn more, and he asks, okay, how can you say that in Valencian language or in Italian? Okay, I think this is maybe the moment to start. But at the moment, we didn't start.
Great. Thank you, Ruben, for clarifying that. And so Croatian, Spanish, and German. Very interesting combination. We have Deborah and then Matthias. Deborah?
I just wanted to say that I think it's very important that the community around is also supportive of raising children multilingually. I see now that I live in Europe, I see that people are a lot more open to the idea that children will grow up and will speak more languages. But when I was living in Australia with my children, I had a lot of friends from different countries, different backgrounds and different languages who tried to maintain those heritage languages with their children. But the children, when they got into school, generally rejected them and just wanted to speak English and insisted they wanted to speak English. They didn't want to be different to the other children in any way. And I've had parents actually saying to me, what can I do? What can I do? And I just said, all you can do really, I think, is just keep doing it. Just keep speaking to your children in those languages. If they answer in English, well, don't get upset with them. Don't insist, just accept that, but keep at it. At least they have that passive knowledge of it. And then later on, friends did find that as their children became teenagers, they then started to value the language again, and they started wanting to get it back. But because the atmosphere in the community was really not supportive of multilingualism, that had a detrimental effect on how those children took that on board and accepted it.
Thank you, Deborah. That's very important. I think you raised 2 very important questions, the first of which is stigma, right? And I think framing multilingual situations from the code switching paradigm versus the translingual paradigm also affects that positive or negative conceptualization of it. So Ofelia Garcia, for instance, has conducted extensive research in bilingual schools where she's proved that framing multilingual situations with a code switching paradigm leads to a stigma in the classroom. For instance, if it's a Spanish class and then you use English, you'll be punished for using English, or vice versa. If it's an English class and you use Spanish, you'll be punished for using your whole linguistic repertoire. So a capacious linguistic repertoire is stigmatized. Whereas in translingual paradigms, you can use as many parts of your linguistic repertoire as you wish. You can activate as many words from quote unquote different languages. So this is actually encouraged rather than stigmatized. And the other issue you raised, Deborah, is the value of languages. So, and I've encountered many cases of this when parents comment that their children did not value a certain language at a certain age, but then over the years, they came to appreciate that language. They cherished that time when they were a kid and they had fun with their families speaking different languages, and they go back to learn that language or perfect that language. So the valuation of languages changes over time. It's not rigid. Who else wanted to speak? We have Matthias and Anja. Matthias?
I will be very brief. In addition to the background, to the educational context, and to the upbringing in order that everybody to become multilingual, there are also different contexts as multilingual people since childhood tend to sometimes to identify the certain different contexts in order to use which language or other. For example, in the case of multilingual parents or parents from different nationalities, okay, two languages, one for every parent. But also there are, for example, in that context, for example, in the school, a third language, or with friends a fourth language, or even though with an area of interest a fifth language. Sometimes there are contexts, there are situations where children can be raised as much language as different contexts they are, depending in which country or which region or which area are you living. I mean that multilingual children, despite all the tools we have for language learning, and despite the mainstream school system, or despite the autodidact, the self-taught, I mean, everybody of us, I mean, those who at least we had the chance to learn language from an early stage, we can identify different contexts and associate one language with different contexts, and that also is one of those tools that we encourage that to language learning. It's just that.
Thank you, Matthias. Different language used in different contexts. Exactly. Anja, and before Anja makes her contribution, a brief reminder that we have 12 minutes left in this debate. So please be concise in your contributions, and bear in mind that this might be the last time you may be able to speak at this debate. Anja. Anja, are you there?
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. In the end, I would like to invite Victor to then say his story, because I think he also was raising his daughter in different languages. Okay, so to answer to Deborah, to what Deborah said, yes, in this book, the author also says the struggles, like so easy how it was before the children went to primary school. And she even said that they only spoke those two languages as with father and mother, two different languages, and they didn't use the third language, so English, because they were in the United States. But then when they went to the kindergarten or primary school, that's suddenly, I mean, they actually chose not to go to kindergarten because they were afraid that they will stop using those home languages because of overuse of English, because of course child is 8 hours in the kindergarten and later just a few hours maybe with parents before you put them to bed and then go into the job next day, right? So they choose intentionally not to expose their children to kindergarten, and so they were exposed to English only when they went into primary school. And she mentioned the same problem, how many people in America, maybe from Ukraine and not from Hungary and other countries, they give up their home languages speaking to their children because it was too much of a struggle because overuse of English. So what I want to expose, or maybe ask, what were your experience from other people? How did they not give up on those languages? Because those who keep going on, who keep insisting, who find power and strength to keep speaking those languages, even though children might struggle making mistakes or don't want to speak, especially after they go to school. Author also says that when they started, growing up, they didn't want to be different from peers. So they stopped speaking those languages in public or something, just maybe home languages at home with their parents. But of course, how long do the teenagers speak with their parents, right? So this is why you have to find the environment that supports the language you want to teach to the children. And this is why you have to find the topics or stuff that your child is interested in and find them, those things in that language or those languages that you teach them. I mean, that's what I've learned from experience. I mean, I don't have my own children, but from what I've read and researched. Thank you. So if anybody wants to respond to this, or Victor, you can tell us your story.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Anja. Very important how to find the motivation to keep going, how to not give up on languages. I mean, the cases that I'm most familiar with are Ladino. And here I encounter what was already mentioned in the discussion, that some parents lack the confidence to speak multilingually to their children, or were afraid that this learning of a new language will be stigmatized in the social context. For instance, parents who spoke Ladino and English in the US and wanted their kids to be integrated into the US society will feel that teaching them Ladino at the same time may get them stigmatized in the classroom, etc. Victor wants to answer, and then Deborah.
Okay, just 2 or 3 phrases. When I was a kid, adolescent, I was, believe me or not, I was very, very shy and wouldn't talking to very, very few people. When I first started to learn Russian, I did it by myself, and it gave me a big empowering feeling. And when I restarted learning at adult more languages, it completely changed me, because people don't believe I was the same shy guy I was. It's transformation, and there's no time to start. You can start anytime.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Victor. And Deborah?
I just wanted to say that what I noticed is the same as she mentioned in the book, the importance of connecting them with the culture as well, and having those cultural experiences. And I was thinking those children in the book were very lucky, because they got to go to China, they got to go to Switzerland, spend time in those countries, which is not possible quite often for migrant children in migrant families. But what I noticed in Australia, the parents that were successful, that even if the children sort of went to English for a while, they came back to it, tended to be those where the family was still embedded in a community, where there were other people that spoke the language, they enjoyed cultural things together. Perhaps they had extended family as well, so the children valued being able to speak with their grandparents and others who didn't speak English so well. So by having those cultural connections, they were able to keep the language going more successfully.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So the importance of remaining tied to the culture and having those connections, yeah, indeed. Who else wants to make a last contribution? We have 5 to 6 minutes remaining. Otherwise, we'll move into the topic for our next debate. Victor wants to say that.
Last phrase. I am just reading an audiobook here, an audiobook by John Medina, Your Best Brain. A simple phrase: happiness is relationship with people, not money. That's all.
Happiness, sorry, is the relationship with people, not money?
No, happiness is not money. If you have money, this is not happiness. Happiness is relationship and connection with people. If you had connection with people, doesn't mean you don't have that much money. You have had it.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Victor. Who else? Anyone else? I'll give 30 seconds for people to raise their hands, otherwise we'll move into the next topic. Ten seconds, final countdown. 5 seconds. All right, I think I thank you all for this lively discussion and debate. I think it was fascinating. It was really, really good. And yeah, Matthias?
Next topic?
Yes, and then so choosing the next topic. Now, as always, I will suggest on the screen different topics for our next meeting. Please feel free to add on top of those new topics in the chat, and then we'll choose from all of them, okay? So we have so far language and geopolitics, polyglot sole ownership companies as the privatization of commons. This means that polyglossia can be understood as a public good that is then privatized by different companies. Teaching approaches, Azure, total physical response, and crashing. Why locals respond in English when addressing their local language? A question that bugs many around the world. Contrastive analysis in multilingual translations, and post-colonial and decolonial linguistics. I'm now going to the chat and reading out loud further suggestions. Just give me a second, please. So, okay, so Victor says Pavlovian conditioning in learning languages. Okay, so Pavlovian conditioning in learning languages, and Anja says Georgi Lozano and his method of language learning. So we can add to the A to F options that you see there. G option would be Pavlovian conditioning in learning languages, and H option would be Anja's suggestion on this method of learning language by Lazzoni. Please select just one letter, okay? Please select just one letter because there's many of us and it's really hard to compute more than one letter, at least for me, coming from the humanities. So now we have 1 minute to write just one letter with our preferred topic from A to H. From A to H. And now myself, I'm going to vote as well. Let me think about this. Okay, let me see. So we have Usman, who hasn't voted yet. Who else hasn't voted yet? Ruben is yet to vote. Gayan is yet to vote. So Gayan, Ruben, Usman, Tim. Tim has Tim voted? Oh, he's voted already. Okay, so
yeah,
just
I voted the
Usman.
same.
Yeah, just Gayan, Usman, and Ruben.
I voted, but I sent to Anja only.
Yes, she sent it to me.
Yeah,
What was the vote?
let me do it again. Let me do it again.
Yeah. So
Now it's here.
Okay, now so now all votes are in, and let me see. So we have A twice, but it was Matthias writing twice. One as a direct message. Okay, so A, C, D, C, F, B, C, D, A. So it's C is the winner, right? We have 3 votes for C. Anjas, Deborah, and Ruben. Yeah. So, okay. So we'll do C, which is teaching approaches, Azure, total physical response, and crashing. Now, who wants to lead this discussion? It should be ideally somebody different from Anja, because she presented today. So anybody can volunteer. Who would like to present?
When is our next meeting?
So our next meeting that is a really good question. Would be will probably be at the end of February is the best option, because otherwise we will have two meetings in 1 month, which I don't think is conducive to a productive session. So end of February, last week of February.
I cannot be, definitely, because I have a business trip at the end of February to Latvia.
Mm-hmm.
So I will not be able to present. I'm sorry.
Okay, so Victor not, Gayan not. Who can present at the end of February on this topic? Would like to present?
Yeah, I could probably do it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Deborah.
Yeah, because I'm studying my next module for my master's, and it's looking at different methods of teaching, multilingual teaching. So this would probably fit with what I'm about to start studying. I don't know anything about these things, but I will look them up, and hopefully come up with a presentation.
Fantastic.
I do it. If you need any data, I have a lot. If you want,
Great, I will be in touch.
Okay, is Deborah the only volunteer for presentation? Because if she is, then we don't even need to vote. It's automatically given to them. 10 seconds.
I can as always help find some studies if they are not available.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Just connect to me, ask the studies. If I can have it, I send it in the group or in the email.
Okay, perfect. All right, so we'll do that then. Next meeting, last week of February, presented by Deborah.
Yes, in my opinion, Deborah is the most suitable for.
Okay, well, it's the only one, so it's already decided. All right, so thank you so much for this conversation today. Looking forward to next month's presentation, and have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye. Ciao. Ciao a tutti.
Everybody, bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.